The envelope sat on the corner table, untouched. Margaret watched the well-dressed man slide it back toward her without a glance, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the coffee-stained window of Ruby's diner. She'd served him black coffee and apple pie. Same as always, but tonight felt different. The way his hands trembled as he signed the check. The way he refused to meet her gaze. For 23 years, Margaret had learned to read people through their silences, and this man's silence was louder than any words. She tucked the envelope into her apron pocket without opening it, thinking maybe he'd forgotten. But when she looked back, he was watching her reflection in that window, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. She didn't know then that in 45 minutes, when her shift ended and she stepped into the November rain, everything she thought she understood about kindness would change. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Margaret had worked the evening shift at Ruby's diner for 17 years, ever since her husband Tom passed from a heart attack that came too sudden and left too many bills. Her daughter Sarah called every Sunday from Phoenix, always asking when she'd finally retire, always hearing the same answer: "When the mortgage is paid, sweetheart. Just a few more years." But they both knew those few years kept stretching like taffy, especially after the medical bills from her hip replacement last spring. The insurance covered most of it, but most isn't all, and the gap between most and all can swallow a person whole. The diner smelled like coffee and fried onions, familiar as her own heartbeat. Ruby had sold the place years ago to a corporation that kept the name but changed everything else. New owners meant new rules. No personal phone calls during shifts. No sitting down even when her hip ached something fierce. And the tips, well, they got pooled now and divided up, which seemed fair until you realized the kitchen staff who never smiled at customers got the same cut as folks like Margaret who remembered everyone's usual order and always asked about their grandkids. The man in the corner booth had been coming in every Thursday for about 6 months. She'd learned his order but never his name. Black coffee, 2 sugars, apple pie heated exactly 90 seconds. He wore expensive suits that whispered money in a way that shouted it, and he always sat facing the window like he was waiting for something that never came. She'd tried friendly conversation at first. "Chilly night, isn't it?" Or "That pie's fresh from this morning." But he'd only nod, polite but distant, and she'd learned to give him his space. Some people carry their loneliness like a coat they can't take off. Tonight, though, something was different. When she'd brought his order, he'd looked right at her for the first time ever, really looked, and said, "You have kind eyes." Just that. Nothing more. Then he'd pushed that envelope toward her when she brought the check, and when she'd reached for it, he'd pulled it back fast, like it burned him. "I'm sorry," he'd said, so quiet she almost missed it. "I can't. The check was for $12.40. He'd left exact change on the table, no tip, and walked to the restroom while she cleared his spot. She'd stood there holding his empty pie plate, feeling an odd mix of disappointment and something else she couldn't name. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about being seen, about 23 years of smiling through exhaustion and pretending her hip didn't scream with every step, and getting acknowledged for it. That envelope had felt like acknowledgement, and its absence felt like being erased. In the back, washing dishes beside Roberto, she'd mentioned it. "That man in the corner booth? Something's not right with him." Roberto had shrugged, hands deep in soapy water. "Rich people are weird, Maggie. They got everything and they're still miserable. Don't waste your energy." But Margaret couldn't shake it. She'd seen sadness before, plenty of it. This diner was a way station for the heartbroken, the lonely, the lost. But what she'd seen in that man's face wasn't just sadness. It was recognition, like he'd seen something in her that frightened him. Her shift ended at 9:30. She hung up her apron, collected her purse from the locker, and said goodnight to the night crew. Her car was parked 2 blocks away in the free lot behind the old Methodist church. The rain had started, soft at first but growing insistent, and she hadn't brought an umbrella. Of course. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and stepped into the November cold, her breath forming small clouds in the streetlight glow. That's when she saw him. The man from the corner booth, sitting on the bench across from the diner, rain soaking through his expensive suit. His head was in his hands, and his shoulders shook in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Margaret's first instinct was to keep walking, It wasn't her business. She had her own troubles, her own weight to carry, but something in the set of his shoulders, in the way the rain ran down his bowed head unchecked, stopped her feet from moving forward. She stood there on the sidewalk, rain beginning to plaster her hair to her forehead, watching a man she didn't know fall apart on a public bench, and wondered what on earth could make a person that broken. Margaret's hip protested as she crossed the street, but she ignored it the way she'd learned to ignore most pain. The man didn't look up until she was standing right in front of him, rain dripping from her chin. "You're getting soaked," she said simply. He lifted his head, and in the yellow glow of the streetlight she saw his face was wet with more than rain. "I know," he said. His voice cracked on those two words, and Margaret felt something inside her chest shift and settle into a new shape. She sat down beside him on the bench without asking permission, feeling the cold water soak through her uniform pants immediately. They sat in silence for a moment, two people in the rain with nothing in common except this strange, uncomfortable moment. Finally, he spoke. "I'm Marcus," just his name, offered like a peace treaty. "Margaret," she replied. "But folks call me Maggie." He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand, though it did no good against the rain. "I'm sorry about the tip, Maggie. I'm sorry about a lot of things. You don't owe me an explanation," she said, and meant it. But he shook his head hard, like he was trying to shake something loose. "Yes, I do. Because you were kind to me, every Thursday for months, and I just took it without giving anything back. And tonight, when I finally tried to give something back, I couldn't. I physically could not make myself do it." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Do you know what that feels like? To want to be generous and find yourself completely unable?" Margaret thought about her daughter in Phoenix, about the times Sarah had needed help with her own kids, and Margaret had wanted so badly to send money, to visit, to be the grandmother she'd planned to be. But the bills always came first, and want didn't pay for plane tickets. "I might know a little about that," she said softly. Marcus turned to look at her fully then, really look at her, the way he had in the diner. "Your eyes," he said. "They're the same color as my daughter's were. That same gray-green like the ocean before a storm were, past tense." Margaret felt her stomach drop. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "Leukemia. She was 7. We tried everything. Every treatment, every clinical trial, every experimental drug. I threw money at it like money could solve anything, but it couldn't. All my billions, and I couldn't save her." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was barely audible over the rain. "She died on a Thursday, 6 months ago tonight, and I've been coming to that diner every Thursday since, sitting in the same spot, ordering the same thing, trying to feel close to her somehow. Because the last meal we ate together before she got too sick to eat was apple pie and coffee at a little diner just like Ruby's." Margaret's throat tightened. She'd served grief before, plenty of times, but never knowing what it was. All those Thursdays she'd been serving a memorial. "The envelope," she said slowly, understanding dawning. "What was in it?" Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the soggy envelope and handed it to her. She opened it carefully. Inside was a check for $50,000. Margaret's hands started shaking. "I don't understand. When Emma was sick, there was a nurse, Rachel. She was young. Probably made $30,000 a year, but she stayed late every night, unpaid. Just sitting with Emma when we couldn't be there. Reading to her, singing to her, being present in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the kind of person she was. And I never thanked her properly. I never told her that her kindness mattered more than all the expensive equipment and fancy doctors. She was working 3 jobs and I was a billionaire, and I never thought to help her. After Emma died, I tried to find Rachel to give her something, anything, but she'd moved away. Left nursing, and I've been carrying that guilt like a stone." He looked at Margaret, tears mixing with rain. "Tonight, watching you work, seeing how tired you were but how you smiled anyway, how you remembered everyone's orders, how you asked that young couple about their baby with genuine interest, even though your shift was ending, and you clearly just wanted to sit down. You reminded me of Rachel, of that same selfless kindness. And I thought, here's my chance. Here's my chance to finally do what I should have done, to help someone who deserves it. who gives so much and probably gets so little back. He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. But when I tried to give you that envelope, I froze. Because what if it's not enough? What if nothing I give anyone ever makes up for what I couldn't give Emma? What if I'm just trying to buy forgiveness that I don't deserve? Margaret didn't think. She reached over and took his hand, holding it tight between both of hers. They sat like that in the rain, a waitress and a billionaire, united by loss and the terrible, beautiful fragility of being human. If this moment has touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. You can't buy forgiveness, Margaret said finally. But you don't have to. Your daughter knew you loved her. And this guilt you're carrying, this need to help people, that's love too. It's just love with nowhere to go. She released his hand and carefully put the check back in the envelope, then placed it gently on the bench between them. I can't take this, Marcus. Not because you don't deserve to give it, but because that's not what either of us needs right now. Marcus stared at the envelope like it was a bomb about to detonate. Then what do we need? He asked, and Margaret heard the desperation underneath the question. She stood up slowly, her hip complaining, water streaming from her clothes. I don't know, she admitted, but I don't think we figure it out sitting in the rain. She held out her hand to him. Come on. Let's get you dried off. But as she said it, as Marcus stood and took her hand, Margaret saw something that made her blood run cold. Across the street, in the diner's window, a woman stood watching them. Even from this distance, Margaret could see her face clearly in the light, and the expression on that face was pure, calculated fury. Marcus followed her gaze and went rigid. No, he breathed. No, she said she wouldn't follow me. She promised. Before Margaret could ask who he was talking about, the woman was crossing the street toward them, moving with purpose, and Margaret suddenly realized this night was far from over. The woman's heels clicked against the wet pavement with military precision. She was younger than Margaret, maybe 45, dressed in a sleek black coat that probably cost more than Margaret made in 3 months. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her face held the kind of beauty that came from expensive procedures and careful maintenance. Marcus, she said, her voice clipped and cold. What are you doing? She didn't even glance at Margaret, as if waitresses in soaked uniforms were simply part of the scenery, unworthy of acknowledgement. Marcus took a step back, and Margaret saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Not of physical harm, but something deeper. The fear of disappointing someone whose approval you've been chasing your whole life. Hello, Mother, he said quietly. Mother. Margaret's mind raced, recalculating everything. The woman's eyes finally flickered to Margaret, assessing and dismissing her in less than a second. Get in the car, Marcus. This is embarrassing. Her tone suggested she was speaking to a child caught doing something shameful, not a grown man. A billionaire. Her son. I'm not leaving, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. His mother's expression hardened. Don't be ridiculous. You're sitting in the rain like a homeless person, crying over that check again. This has to stop. Emma is gone. Your charity cases won't bring her back. The words were like slaps, each one landing with casual cruelty. Margaret felt her own anger rise, hot and sudden. That's your granddaughter you're talking about, she heard herself say. Show some respect. The woman's gaze swung to Margaret with laser focus. Excuse me? Her voice could have frozen fire. Did I ask for your opinion? Margaret should have backed down, should have remembered her place, her bills, her precarious position in a world where people like this woman could destroy people like her with a single phone call. But she thought about Emma, a 7-year-old girl she'd never met, and she thought about her own Sarah, and something in her refused to stay quiet. No, ma'am, but I'm giving it anyway. Your son is grieving. He's in pain, and you're treating him like he's done something wrong by having a heart. For a moment, nobody spoke. The rain fell steadily, drumming against the pavement, filling the terrible silence. Then Marcus's mother laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. How much did he offer you? 50,000? 100? Let me save you some time. I'll write you a check for whatever amount is in that envelope if you walk away right now and forget you ever met my son. She pulled out a checkbook from her purse with practiced efficiency. People like you always have a price. Margaret felt the words like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were almost true. $50,000 could change her life, could pay off her mortgage, could let her finally visit Sarah, could give her the retirement she'd been dreaming about for years. She could take the money from this cold woman, go home, and never look back. It would be so easy. Have you ever faced a moment where doing the right thing meant giving up something you desperately needed? Let us know in the comments. But then she looked at Marcus, standing in the rain with his shoulders hunched, looking smaller than any billionaire should look, and she saw something she recognized. Not in his circumstances, but in his heart. The loneliness of carrying grief alone. The exhaustion of trying to be strong when you're shattered inside. The desperate need to matter, to make a difference, to feel like your pain has purpose. She'd felt all of that after Tom died, when the world expected her to move on, and she didn't know how. "I don't want your money," Margaret said, and was surprised to find she meant it completely. "And your son isn't a child who needs rescuing from himself. He's a grown man trying to process loss in the only way he knows how." She turned to Marcus. "But she's right about one thing. Sitting in the rain isn't helping anything." Marcus's mother opened her mouth to speak, but Margaret held up a hand. "I wasn't talking to you." "Marcus," his mother said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you don't get in that car right now, there will be consequences. The board already questions your judgment. Your business partners wonder if you're stable enough to lead. Don't give them more ammunition." It was a threat wrapped in concern, and Margaret saw Marcus flinch. Saw him start to fold, to give in to years of conditioning that told him his mother knew best, that her way was the only way. But then something shifted in his face. Some decision made in the space between heartbeats. "No," he said. "Just that one word, but it landed like thunder." His mother's face went pale. "What did you say to me?" Marcus straightened his shoulders. "I said no, Mother. I'm not getting in your car. I'm not going to keep pretending I'm fine when I'm not. And I'm not going to let you treat people with kindness like they're weak or stupid or trying to con me. Emma would be ashamed of both of us if she could see this." His voice cracked on his daughter's name, but he didn't stop. "I'm ashamed of us." The moment hung suspended, fragile as glass. Then Marcus's mother snapped her checkbook shut, her face a mask of controlled fury. "When you're ready to stop being foolish, you know where to find me. But don't expect me to clean up your mess when this all falls apart." She turned and walked back to a black car Margaret hadn't noticed before, her heels clicking out a staccato rhythm of disappointment. The car pulled away, leaving Marcus and Margaret standing alone in the rain once more. Marcus looked at Margaret, his eyes wide and slightly terrified. "I just told my mother no." "I don't think I've ever done that before. Not once in 53 years. "Well," Margaret said, feeling an unexpected smile tug at her lips. "How does it feel?" Marcus stood there for a moment, rain streaming down his face, looking like a man who'd just jumped off a cliff and was surprised to find he could fly. "Terrifying," he admitted, "and wonderful, and terrifying." Then he started laughing, really laughing, the kind of laugh that shakes your whole body and comes from somewhere deep and true. Margaret found herself laughing too, though she couldn't have explained why. Two soaking wet people laughing like lunatics on a rainy street corner. If anyone had asked her this morning how she'd spend her Thursday night, this wouldn't have made the list. "Come on," she said, wiping her eyes. "There's a 24-hour diner 2 blocks from here. Not Ruby's, better coffee, worse pie. Let's get warm and figure out what happens next." They walked side by side through the rain, and Margaret noticed that Marcus matched his pace to hers, slowing when her hip bothered her. Not commenting on it, but just being attentive in a way that spoke of real consideration. At the diner, they slid into a booth and ordered coffee and pie anyway, and Margaret felt the surreal quality of the night settle around them like a blanket. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. "That check wasn't just about Emma. It wasn't just about Rachel or guilt or any of that." He met her eyes. "When I saw you tonight, really saw you, I recognized something I'd been running from. You were tired. Your hip was bothering you. You've clearly been working for decades in a job that doesn't pay enough and doesn't appreciate you enough. But you smiled at that young couple with their baby like their joy was your joy. You asked Roberto about his mother's surgery. You remembered that the old man in the corner booth likes his water without ice. You gave pieces of yourself all night long, and nobody thanked you for any of it. And I thought, that's what I've become. Someone who takes and never sees the people doing the giving. Margaret stirred sugar into her coffee slowly. You see me now, she said quietly. That counts for something. Marcus nodded. I do, and I want to do more than see you. I want to help you. Not because it makes me feel better about myself, though. Maybe that's part of it. But because you deserve help. Because kindness should be rewarded, not taken for granted. He pulled out his phone, pulled up something on the screen, and showed her. This is a foundation I started in Emma's name. We fund scholarships, medical research, support programs for families dealing with childhood cancer. It has a good board, good people running it, but it's been faceless. Just money moving around, trying to do good but not really connecting with anyone. He set the phone down. I want you to run the community outreach program. I want you to be the person who finds the Rachels of the world, the people who give everything and get nothing back, and I want you to help them. Not with checks thrown at them by rich men trying to absolve guilt, but with real support, real connection, real seeing. Margaret felt her breath catch. Marcus, I'm a waitress. I don't have any experience with nonprofits or foundations or... You have something better, he interrupted gently. You have empathy. You have kindness. You have the ability to see people for who they really are. Everything else can be learned, and the salary would be enough that you could finally retire from rubies. Visit your daughter. Get that hip looked at properly. Live. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. It was too much, too fast, too good to be true. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for a stranger? Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, the same way she'd taken his on the bench. Because you're not a stranger. Not anymore. Because tonight, when you could have walked past me, you stopped. When my mother offered you money to leave, you stayed. When I was drowning in grief and guilt, you threw me a lifeline without even knowing you were doing it. You reminded me why Emma loved the world, even when the world was hurting her. You reminded me that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we have. Margaret squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of the offer settle into her bones. It would mean leaving Ruby's, leaving the familiar, even though the familiar hurt. It would mean trusting this man, trusting that his offer was real and would last. It would mean stepping into a life she'd never imagined for herself, at an age when most people had stopped imagining anything new at all. I need to think about it, she said finally. Marcus nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Maggie, while you're thinking, remember that Emma taught me something important in her 7 years. She taught me that life is short, and love is shorter, and kindness is the only thing that makes any of it bearable. Don't wait too long to say yes to joy. If you've been moved by this story of unexpected connection and second chances, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales like this one. They sat in that diner until nearly midnight, talking about Emma, about Tom, about loss and love and the strange ways life knits broken people together. And when they finally parted ways, exchanging phone numbers and promises to talk soon, Margaret walked to her car with her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. She didn't know yet that when she got home, there would be a voicemail from Sarah saying she was coming to visit next month, that her granddaughter had drawn a picture for Grandma Maggie that she couldn't wait to show her. She didn't know that in 1 week she'd accept Marcus's offer and give her notice at Ruby's, or that Roberto would cry when she told him, saying she deserved good things. She didn't know how much her life was about to change. But standing in the parking lot, looking up at the clearing sky where stars were beginning to emerge from behind the clouds, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt possibility, and that, she thought, might be enough to start with. 3 months later, Margaret stood in the community center on the east side of town, watching a young nurse named Destiny cry tears of relief as she held a check that would pay off her student loans. You don't have to do this, Destiny kept saying, but Margaret just smiled and squeezed her shoulder. Yes, we do, she said gently, because someone did it for you once, and you didn't even know it. Now you're passing it forward. Behind her, Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets, his face soft with something that looked like peace. He'd been coming to these presentations for the past month, never making a big show of it. Just quietly bearing witness to the kindness his foundation was spreading like ripples in still water. The Emma Whitmore Foundation had grown beyond anything Margaret had imagined. They'd helped 43 people so far: nurses, teachers, social workers, caregivers, people who gave pieces of their soul to others and never expected anything in return. Margaret had learned to write grants, manage budgets, coordinate with non-profits, but more than that, she'd learned to tell stories. To find the Rachels and the Robertos and the destinies of the world and let them know they mattered. That their kindness hadn't gone unnoticed, even when it felt invisible. Her hip didn't hurt as much anymore. The foundation's insurance had covered a better treatment plan, and she'd started physical therapy twice a week. She'd visited Sarah in Phoenix for 2 full weeks, met her granddaughter properly for the first time since she was a baby, read her stories at bedtime, and taught her how to make Tom's famous pancakes. Sarah had cried when Margaret showed her the foundation website. Seeing her mother's face in the Our Team section with the title Director of Community Outreach. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she'd whispered. Dad would be too. And Margaret had let herself believe it. But the biggest change wasn't in her circumstances. It was in her heart. She'd spent so many years feeling like she was just surviving, just putting one foot in front of the other, waiting for life to get easier. She'd forgotten that life doesn't get easier. You just get stronger. And kindness doesn't wait for easy times. It blooms in the hard times, in the rain and the cold, in the moments when you're tired and your hip hurts, and you still choose to stop for a stranger on a bench. Marcus had become a real friend, the kind who called just to check in, who remembered to ask about Sarah and Roberto and the baby couple from the diner. They had coffee every Thursday morning, always at a different place, trying new spots around the city. Last week he'd brought a photo album, pictures of Emma, a gap-toothed grin wearing a princess costume. Bald from chemo but laughing, covered in finger paint. Sleeping peacefully, her hand wrapped around her father's thumb. "I couldn't look at these for months," Marcus had said, his voice thick. "Every time I tried, I just felt the loss. But now, when I look at them, I feel the love too. I feel grateful I got 7 years with her. That's 7 years more than some people get with the people they love." He'd looked at Margaret then, his eyes clear and calm. "You helped me find my way back to gratitude, back to her, in a way. Thank you for that." Margaret had reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, no words necessary. Some things were too big for language. Some connections were forged in rain and pain, and the choice to be kind when kindness wasn't expected. She still thought about that night sometimes. About the envelope on the bench, soggy with rain and heavy with impossible possibilities. About Marcus's mother driving away in her expensive car, unable to see that love isn't control, and grief isn't weakness. About the moment she'd chosen to sit down on that bench instead of walking past. One small choice, one moment of stopping instead of going, and everything had changed. Not dramatically, not like in movies where orchestras swell and problems disappear in a flash of light. But really, truly, in the quiet, steady way that real life changes when you let it. Last week, she'd gone back to Ruby's for lunch. Roberto had hugged her so tight she could barely breathe, and the new owners had asked if she'd be interested in consulting on their staff training program, teaching servers how to really see their customers. She'd said yes. Emma's legacy wasn't just in the foundation. It was in every person who chose to be present, to be kind, to see others as worthy of love and attention. It was in Destiny going back to work at the hospital with her debt lifted, able to focus on healing instead of surviving. It was in the retired teacher they'd helped last month, who now volunteered at the youth center reading to kids who needed someone to care. It was in Marcus, learning to live with loss instead of running from it. It was in Margaret, learning that it's never too late for a new chapter. As she watched Destiny thank Marcus, watched his face light up with genuine joy untainted by guilt, Margaret felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked her over. Life was strange and hard, and full of rain-soaked benches and impossible losses. But it was also full of this connection, transformation, the chance to be someone's answer to a prayer they didn't know they'd prayed. "You okay?" Marcus asked, appearing at her side. She nodded, smiling through sudden tears. "Yeah, I'm really okay. For the first time in a long time." If you've been touched by Margaret and Marcus's story, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, kindness, and the connections that change our lives in ways we never expect. Thank you for taking this journey with us tonight. May you find your own rainy bench moment, your own chance to stop instead of walking past, your own opportunity to choose kindness when it costs you something. Because those moments, as small as they seem, are the ones that matter most. Those are the ones that change everything. Good night, friends. And remember, the world always needs more people like Margaret, like Rachel, like Destiny, like you.